Hello, everybody. So today we're going to talk and maybe summarize again the the whole process of how astrology is put together. I wanted to know how it's put together, not just using it. The books are all like a driver's manual. They don't tell you why. They just say, "Oh, it's like this, like this, like this." The only challenge is that the books were written thousands of years ago, and uh, it was based on the heavens at that time, and uh, and nowadays, especially in the East, we all revere the ancient knowledge. But if one doesn't see the context of it, then we don't have a complete picture, and we can't be complete in our astrology. So I want to start by saying that astrology was based on uh, what we see in places like Stonehenge and other uh, monuments. We see that the ancients were trying to figure out when the four seasons happened. So they had different ways to measure time. So they noticed that the day and the night were equal on certain days. And that happened to be on the days that the sun, during its yearly travels, was at the equator. Night and day were equal. So the spring equinox and the fall equinox were 2 points that they were aware of. Then the second obvious observation was that the sun was most intense at a certain time during the summer solstice, which falls around June 21st, and that in winter the sun was the darkest or most below the equator. Basically, it was coldest, and that's December 21st approximately. So they set up these stone circles and other markers so that when the sun rays hit a certain level, a certain stone would light up, and that way they could tell these four markers. And then the second thing they were trying to accomplish was to understand time itself. So there are several cycles we see. So one cycle that was very obvious, because ancient man used to be outside and he used to look at the stars. There were no lights like today. So if you ever have been outside on a night when the stars are all there, they look like lanterns, like diamonds in the sky, and you can see to infinity. You could see the Milky Way coming up like a rainbow. And it's so beautiful, and there's something holy about that. So ancient man connected to the stars and connected to the moon, could see the moon. And time started to be measured in terms of the moon. It was clear that there was a new moon and there was a full moon. And in between, the sun was increasing. I mean, not the sun, but the moon. The moon was increasing every day, and then it was decreasing every day, from new moon to full moon and back again. And so they noticed that it takes about 15 days for the moon to increase and 15 days to decrease, because they also were measuring in terms of the sun, the daytime, from sunrise to sunrise or from sunset to sunset, depending on how you looked at it. But the 24-hour cycle of sunrise and then sunset, sunrise, and then sun coming up again. So they noticed that it took this many cycles of the sun to create that moon period where you go from the new moon all the way to the full moon and then back again. And if you look 15 days increasing, 15 days decreasing, that makes up 30 days. So time was measured in terms of a month. They called month after the moon, month. And so they would talk about it in terms, well, I'll see you in 2 moons, 2 months, or in 3 months, 3 moons, 3 full moons, for example. So that's how they measured time. And then they noticed these 4 seasons. So if you draw a picture of the path of the sun and the moon going around above and below the equator, you have a circle, basically, kind of a circle. And then it turns out that the sun moves along the circle 1 degree every day. This is a circle of 360 degrees. That's what circles are. So every day the sun moves 1 degree, 1 degree, 1 degree, 1 degree. And in terms of the circle, they, at the equator, if you imagine that this is the circle and there's the equator, then there were 4 points in this structure. One was at the equator during fall, one was at the equator during spring, and then there was 1 point at the highest above the equator and 1 point below, the lowest below the equator. So these were 4 points of a circle. Okay. And the ancients called going from the bottom of the circle, going back up towards spring, towards the equinox, and then going towards summer, like that was the rising energy, Uttarayana. And then there was the descending aspect, where you go from the highest point of the sun and moon above the equator, and you go down, 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 and that was the Dakshinayana. So you have 2 times of the year where you've got the increasing light and the decreasing light of the sun. And then, well, they wanted to look at each quadrant. So you have a circle and you've got 4 points. So it divides the circle into 4 parts. So each part is a season. So you go from spring to the highest point, that's to summer. And then from summer, you go towards fall, to the fall equinox, where the sun is at the equator. And then you've got from fall, you go towards winter, where it's the lowest. And then you've got the last quarter of the circle is winter. Now, it wasn't enough to just think, okay, 4 seasons. What you want to do is divide each season into the beginning of the season, the middle of the season, and the end of each season. So you have the beginning energy, the middle energy, and the changing energy corresponding to each of these 4 quadrants. And it turns out that because the circle is 360 degrees, and you've got 4 quadrants, if you divide each quadrant into 3 equal parts, each part will be, this is a 90-degree angle of a circle. Then each part is going to be 30 degree, 30 degree, 30 degree, 30 degree, 30 degree. So each piece of the pie will be 30 degrees of the circle. And so we have 12 divisions of this circle. 3 times 4, 4 points, 4 quadrants divided into 3. And you can see this in a drawing that I have here. You see, those are the 12 sectors as we go from spring all the way to the highest point of the sun in summer on the 21st of June, and then we continue on. So you see, we have 12 sectors. Now, and each one corresponded to a month, because it turns out that the sun goes 1 degree every day. So 30-day grouping, so it's a perfect lunar month. Second lunar month, third lunar month. They call the first part of a season creative, or we call it in astrology movable. The second part, they called it fixed, steady. That's the middle of a season, is more fixed or steady. And then the changing part, the dual or changeable sign, that changeable month of the season. And now, how do you make this practical? Well, I had to look into history. a little bit. And I found out that these 12 positions, these 12 spatial positions that we're talking about of the seasons, was determined back at least 6,000 years ago, during the time of ancient Sumeria and the ancient Yajurveda. And there's evidence to know that it was about 6,000 years ago when they started formulating a lot of these details of astrology. And 6,000 years ago, the stars were in certain position. I mean, the heavens looked a certain way. It turns out the Earth wobbles. So every 2,100 years, the heavens keep rotating a little bit. They shift. So our constellations, they keep changing positions in the stars relative to us. Okay. So what happened was 4,000 years went by. Before 4,000 years went by, during a few hundred years before the Common Era, before the time of Jesus and Christianity, what happened was Greek civilization started expanding. So Alexander the Great conquered the Middle East. He conquered Egypt. He conquered India, part of India. I didn't know this, but Northwest India was actually a Greek colony. There were Greek colonies there. So India, Egypt, Middle East, and then part of Europe. And what happened during that time, the astrologers started to get together. They start pooling their knowledge. And so some centuries went by, and the next phase was the Roman Empire, which took over the Greek Empire, and it extended all the way to England, all of Europe. It basically was even larger group. People don't realize this, but the capital of the Roman Empire was Rome, which had a population estimated of about 1 million people. It had running water, it had bathroom, toilet, running water, it had recreation centers, theaters, and so on, and the population of the Roman Empire as such was about 76 million people. And each area had each province was like a state, and it had a governor. And the Roman Empire also had senators that met together to make decisions. It had leadership, and it had law, Roman law, which is what we actually have modeled after this whole Roman culture. We've adopted that for the West. So during that time, because the Romans were very interested to write things down, they were very good at record keeping. What happened was astrology, West and East, from India all the way through, the Roman emperors had Indian astrologers. The books started to be written down, and we see evidence for that. I'll explain that in a little bit. So that's when the books were written down, and now think 2,000 years ago. Things are being written down, and there's a lot of discussion and so on about astrology. And at that time, now how do you make this circle? You see this circle? See the circle? The circle above and below the equator, you've got these different sectors. So you know that this sector, that's going to be April, that's this time of the year and this time of the year and so on, this month of the season. But how do you make that practical? If there weren't necessarily computers going on and all kinds of tables. What you did was you looked up at the sky and you said, well, in the number one sector during spring, in that number one sector, the first month when the sun is rising above the equator. Well, over here, there's this constellation. And over here, the second month, there's this constellation lined up. At that time, 2,000 years ago, this was Aries. This was Taurus. This was Gemini. This was Cancer. This was Leo. This was Virgo. This was Libra. This was Scorpio. This was Sagittarius. This was Capricorn. This was Aquarius. This was Pisces. So they describe the different qualities of the seasons of each month. And they said, this is Aries and it's got these qualities. And this is Taurus and it's got these qualities. They weren't thinking 2,000 years from now, 2,100 years from now, the heavens are going to look completely different. Just like we don't think today, like, what are people 2,000 years from now going to be thinking? So these many years have passed by, and now these positions are occupied. Now there's a different constellation there. Pisces. Over here is Aries. So Aries is in the middle of the month, and then you've got Taurus, and so on. So things are different, but what is consistent is the energy of each lunar month, and each sector of the sky defines the timing of that. Now, how did these constellations, or these, you could say, labels, like Aries for number 1 sector, Taurus for number 2 sector, that were defined by the constellations, how did they get their meanings? I'm bringing this out. Most people just accept, oh, Aries is creative and it's more fiery and all of that, and Taurus is more nurturing and family oriented and so on, and Gemini is changing and communication oriented and all of that. So how did they get those meanings? It wasn't pulled out of a hat. People observed, and they felt that not only are we part of nature's energies, we partake of the energies of that month, of that season, but we also partake of the social consciousness of that month. Each month we have different activities that our community and our city does. Now remember, this is thousands of years ago when communities were more agriculture based. So everybody participated together in sustaining the community through agriculture, which is still true for many countries, but we've gone a little further away from that in the big cities. So this brings me to the second point. How does each sector, which has a label from 2,000 years ago, as Aries, Taurus, etc., how does it relate to community consciousness and thereby acquire its qualities? So Aries has that label. Aries has certain qualities for that first lunar month, and Taurus the second lunar month, and so on. So in our next video, we're going to talk about how that works. So till then, we'll see you.